Okay, let's proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Over the long adjournment, we had occasion to obtain relevant portions of the interim constitution, and although it needs to be checked, I'm able to say at the moment that it deals very sparsely and in very general terms with internal security, which is a function in the interim constitution under the South African Police Service, and then in the constitutional principles deals with security forces being required to perform their functions and powers in the national interest and shall be prohibited from furthering or prejudicing party political interest, but subject to a check that those seem to be the only 2 or 3 sections of the Constitution and constitutional principles that might be relevant. So the simple answer is that there is no detail, certainly of the nature in the final Constitution.
Yes.
If you would like a copy now of the relevant sections, we haven't copied all of it, but we'll do so after checking.
Okay, so we could replace this maybe tomorrow morning.
Yes, it'll be replaced tomorrow morning.
Yeah, okay.
Properly paginated.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mr. Sheikh, at paragraph 10 of your statement on page 3 of the bundle, PP 1, you refer, as you referred earlier, to your appointment and the appointment of your 2 colleagues.
That's correct.
And you say in paragraph 11, collectively we were required to form the new organization, the State Security Agency, and you've alluded to that in your explanations of the changes in the structures earlier today.
That's correct.
You refer in paragraph 11 to different organizational structures. What are those? That's before the change.
Yes, these were the structures before the change. They were the structures that resulted first from the founding legislation in 1994 and the amended legislation in 1997, and they are the National Intelligence Agency, the South African Secret Service, the South African National Academy of Intelligence.
It was for training.
But training, the National Communication Center, which is the infrastructure for the interceptions, the Office of the Interception Centers, which is the facilitating office of the regulatory office, and the electronic communication system, otherwise known as ComSec, as the communication system to be put in place between and amongst government departments.
Yes. Then, Mr. Sheikh, you referred to briefly and in passing this morning to a significant principle in the changes. It seems that prior to 2009 to 2011, the various intelligence structures were separated organizationally.
That is correct.
And after the changes in 2009 to 2011, as in the past, they had become consolidated once more. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is there anything significant in that?
Yes, indeed. The white paper that informed the laws that were passed in 1994 had a very rational basis to why we wanted to have the dispensation that we negotiated for about 4 years. And one of the central principles was to ensure that we do not have excessive concentration of power in one organization, which is what in fact occurred under the previous dispensation, the apartheid dispensation, where you had, for example, the National Intelligence Service that housed both the domestic operation and its foreign operation. So one of the principles of the new dispensation was to separate these powers and
coordinate. Separate but coordinate.
Separate and coordinate.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why coordination became a principle, and the separation of powers became a principle.
Yes, I'm sorry for interrupting. Yes, you were saying.
So that was the rationale that informed the democratic dispensation of intelligence. And it would appear to me that by the proclamation, we were now going back to a pre-democratic era where we were consolidating everything into one organization again, with the unintended or intended consequence of excessive power in one organization.
Had you been part of the discussions that led to the proclamation, or did those discussions happen while you were out of government service and you came in when those had either advanced too far or had been completed?
I was not party to those discussions. They happened prior to our coming.
Yes.
And subsequent, when we tried to have those discussions, that was not forthcoming either.
You were tasked, however, with the implementation of the outcome of those discussions, as I understand it.
That's correct, under the leadership of the Director General, Ambassador Makatuka.
And then in paragraph 12, you express, as you've expressed earlier, your doubts about the constitutionality of this new arrangement that you were mandated to give effect to.
That's correct.
What were those doubts?
Well, my first doubt was that it was not, the President could establish an intelligence service, but had to do so in keeping with national legislation. It seemed to me that we were establishing an intelligence service by proclamation rather in keeping with national legislation. So Parliament was, as we mentioned before, did not have the benefit of discussing that national legislation. So that's the first objection I had. The second was in the name, and I know nothing much turns on the name, but State Security Agency seems to me, at least from a semantic point of view, having moved away from human security, which was the principle outlined in the Constitution. And this is why, when choosing the names originally in 1994, there was no reference to state security in 1994. It was the National Intelligence Agency and the South African Secret Service. And it was avoiding, in a sense, the use of the word state security.
Well, you indicate that the name might not be important, but we do know that in certain circumstances the label might not be important, but in others it can be important. The name can be important because it's part of what is conveyed to people who have contact or get to know about that institution or that office. And if the name or the label doesn't represent what is intended, it could give a wrong perception about what the institution or the office is about. So maybe you shouldn't be too apologetic about pointing the significance, as far as you are concerned, of the difference between what was intended in '94 and what was represented by the proclamation and the change of the name of the institution.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yes, and you've referred to the structural implications of the changes as well.
Correct.
You deal in paragraph 13 with the reporting lines. that you were obliged to follow on your appointment.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius. You know, Mr. Sheikh, what you are saying about the change could well be very important. Maybe when one, or if one gets to understand from those who were involved in the discussions and who can articulate the rationale, maybe it's not so important, I'm not sure. But you, I see that in your statement, paragraph 12, you say that you were never able to determine the motive or rationale for, I think, the change.
Yes.
You know? And yet, I would have expected that because of the seniority of the position you held yourself, and particularly because of your prior involvement in the discussions leading to 94 in regard to intelligence, I would have expected that you would know, because if you asked, you would be told what was the rationale. But am I to read that whatever attempts you may have made to try and find out why is that a departure from what we envisaged, that you are not given any clear answer?
Yes.
Am I to understand that that's the position?
That is correct, sir. And remember that the State Security Agency was under the leadership of the Director General, Ambassador Matatuka, and I know that he is to give evidence, and under his leadership we have tried on numerous occasions to get an understanding of the rationale so that we could believe in what it is that we were having to do. And you were right in the sense that, yes, all three of us had the knowledge of the negotiation process, the passage through the 1994 Parliament. So there was, in a sense, a disquiet amongst us about knowing the rationale for why we had separated things and not knowing the rationale now for why we are amalgamating things altogether. But then we never survived that long to get to that point.
Well, it's just important for a number of reasons, but part of what some of us, the people, wonder about is sometimes where is the same government. It might have a different president at a particular time, but it's the government of the same ruling party, and one minister goes, another one comes in, and there are so many changes that it's as if it's a minister from a different party who has come in, and sometimes not easy to understand why, because you would have thought that the policies and certain things and principles that are being followed are the same. But sometimes that happens. I mean, you may or may not know, I'm hearing evidence in regard to the digital migration as well, and I was part of the panel in the Constitutional Court which had that case, and over a number of years, stretching over 10 years, you could see there was no real progress being made on these set-top boxes, and the new minister would come and would say, this is the way we are going, and then later on another one would come and say, this is the way we are going, and at the same time you would be having reports in the media that the policy position of the ruling party is different from what the minister is doing. So that's why I'm saying one would have expected that somebody as senior as yourself would have been given information as to what is the rationale for a change from what had been, what all of you had been comfortable with from 94.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think it speaks to the very concept of coherence in government, and perhaps that we haven't all fully understood the importance of coherence and continuity, etc. And I've discovered this problem throughout the continent and elsewhere, where there's constant changing and the bureaucratic dysfunctionality it produces.
Thank you.
Mr. Sheikh, throughout the sittings of the Commission, the Chair has expressed an interest in the views and opinions of various people who've had the knowledge and experience that you have and you've had. He's obviously not bound by that, but what you have pointed out here is the factual basis for misgivings you had at the time.
Correct.
And these misgivings led you to, I presume, ask questions in your own mind and of others. With hindsight, are you able to say what was happening here? Or even to give a view? DCJ is not going to be bound by it, but I think he may want to know.
I just like hearing different perspectives because whether I agree with them or not, they may be beneficial in knowing about them.
In my generous interpretation of the hindsight, I would say that there was a lack of experience in understanding the complexities of intelligence and why we designed what was designed at the time. And with the dropping of my sugar levels, I will say that it could also be, in my view, a very narcissistic approach of the consolidation of power, because power is an attractive thing, but without assuming the obligations that come with the consolidation of that power. So it could be either of the two. And in particular, I would say that in the conduct of very senior officials, and I must say that if you take Ambassador Matatuka as a much senior person than I am, and so is Mr. Janje, who have perhaps a longer history in the intelligence services, we were not accorded the kind of respect that should normally accrue to persons with that experience, and to allow that experience to shape the policies that was unfolding. And that was rather unfortunate, and it led to a situation which just became untenable. So, in my view, it was a combination of inexperience in intelligence affairs and driven by narcissistic consolidation of power.
Well, you know, one might not be able to be categorical, but if you are asking me about something and I'm confident that it's the right thing to do, and I don't have a reason to mistrust you, it's something that I can tell you, and I believe it's a sound basis for my decisions. I would think that the normal thing is, if you ask, tell you, this is why we have changed, this is our experience. You might agree or you might not agree, but I won't hide from you what the reasoning behind is. But of course, if I know that the real reason behind it is not a legitimate one, I might not want to be transparent to you about it. Yeah, okay.
You mentioned power. Let me explore your less generous version. Power in relation to intelligence services, where does that lead, or where can it lead? In relation to how intelligence services are used and to what ends?
Sure. It'll go to a definition of intelligence that I would say that I accept and is generally accepted. Intelligence is a profession of actionable wisdom, where wisdom is derived from the transformation of data to information, information into knowledge, knowledge into insight, insight into wisdom, which is designed either to predict events or influence events. And in both cases, either in the prediction or influencing of events, intelligence represents enormous amount of power under that concept. A knowing what is to happen, or knowing things that are unfolding, allows one to be able to influence the direction of what is unfolding. Let me give you a very simple example. So if I know that you are going to be appointed the next Minister of Finance, sitting here, and I know this appointment will take place in a few days' time, I would also assess how the market will interpret your appointment, and I will be able to make a prediction, a hedging of the currency against your appointment. I could hedge the currency so that when that appointment does happen, I would be able to get a windfall on it. And this, of course, I'm assuming that you are a man, and you are indeed a man of great respect in international communities. Therefore, I would be able to hedge the currency. So you could see how knowing events beforehand is such an important thing, and that is power.
Of course, another example where might be if you know that I'm going to be appointed Minister of Finance, you know it in advance, even if you don't know it as certain, maybe you know it as a probability, and you don't want that to happen, you can use whatever information you have maybe to discredit me before the decision is made.
Indeed.
Is that right as well?
Yes.
That is what can happen.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you have referred to the use of disinformation.
Correct.
You say in paragraph 13 that you reported to Minister Twele, together with your two colleagues who were appointed at the same time.
That's correct.
How did you regard this duty to report to the minister?
I for one, this felt somewhat uncomfortable for me. And I know this is a very career-limiting thing, but reaching the age that I have, I could say it, that I never truly believed in the role of a minister in intelligence. I always felt it to be an oddity. And I can explain why I believe it's an oddity. And I don't believe that the Constitution preferred that this be a presidential responsibility rather than a ministerial responsibility. However, having now to report to a minister, in my own mind, I knew it'll provide the basis of conflict. Does the minister direct intelligence operations? My understanding is the minister should not direct intelligence operations. And a range of these issues made me feel uncomfortable about having to report to a minister. And the preference is that you would go to the president. And it is an expression, or let me just say a derivative of maturity, that if everyone understands that there are matters in which a head of the intelligence service, or in this case the head of the state security agency, should have unfettered access to the president to go and discuss with the president matters of national importance. An example of which could be if there was intelligence picked up about the very Minister of Intelligence, what would the Director General do? Will the Director General take that intelligence to the subject of the intelligence, or should the Director General be able to take this matter directly to the President? And then the Minister should have the maturity or the comfort to accept that in the event that such matters are taken directly to the President without his or her knowledge, that is an acceptable practice of intelligence. Whereas if you only had one single route through a minister, you would be presented at some point in time with some difficulties. Secondly, and this is again my issues, and I know my colleagues may share it to various degrees. When you appoint a Minister of Intelligence in a cabinet, you are ineffectively making him first amongst peers, or her first among peers, because that minister, by the very portfolio that he or she occupies, will come to know information about other ministers for which he or she would have information about, and it just seems that it is an unpreferred situation, and it should go directly to the President. But like I'm saying, the Constitution makes provision for the delegation, the law establish the minister. I just felt it was, and this is a globally contested, debated issue. I always favored the notion that the intelligence should report directly to the President and not via a minister. And if you do have a minister, stipulate quite clearly what the minister is entitled to do, not entitled to do, what should the Director General do, and what the Director General should not do. So there is no conflict in situations when it does arise.
Two things. One, of course, even when you report directly to the President and there is no intervening minister, there may be occasions when the intelligence you pick points to the President himself.
Sure.
In certain circumstances.
Sure.
Maybe you might know better, maybe it's not something usual with presidents around the world. Maybe it is something that does happen. But of course the point you are making is you want to reduce to the absolute minimum.
Correct.
Situations of conflict.
Yes.
So you want to go to the ultimate office. But you also made the point that the minister doesn't direct the operations of intelligence. Now, when you say that, how different is that from other portfolios with regard to the minister and their DGs? Normally, one understands that ministers won't get involved in operational matters. They'll be dealing with policies, and then the DG will be dealing with operational matters. But I guess there may be many cases where maybe the distinction is difficult to identify. But I just want to understand whether when you say that, namely the Minister of Intelligence wouldn't or shouldn't be dealing with shouldn't be directing the operations, whether you are simply reflecting what is something that applies to other departments as well, or you are articulating something that's peculiar to intelligence.
I'm saying it is peculiar to intelligence, and there are various reasons for that. In some countries, the infiltration of some countries by your intelligence services is an event that could lead to those people coming under serious harm in the event that they are detected, etc. So one has to apply incredible caution, and the Director General, and the law stipulates that the Director General is obliged to keep methods, sources, intelligence in such a way as to protect his or her members. And the law makes no distinction from who it must be protected from. But in my view, it includes protecting it from the minister, so that the minister should not know that so-and-so may possibly be working for the service, or this is how the service is going to do certain things, in order to protect the minister, but also to protect the people involved in such operations. And because of the particular nature of intelligence, due consideration must be given to what information is shared outside of the service and to who. And this is why the relationship of trust between the head of a service and the president is sacrosanct in intelligence. And the moment you feel that the head of the service feels that he has lost or she has lost the trust of the president, the decent thing to do is to tender your resignation and to leave, because outside of that trust, no relationship in intelligence can work.
Is your evidence therefore to the effect that even in a case where there is no intervening minister, there is no minister of intelligence, and the head of intelligence reports directly to the president, is your evidence to the effect that in that situation, the directing of the operations resides with the head of the intelligence and not the president?
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
So that's how it should be.
That's
and
how it should be.
That's
Yes.
how, at least maybe it was at a certain stage in
Yes.
South Africa.
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
And that's the way it should be. And that is why you've got to see the three pieces of legislation together. The Director General is responsible for the operation of the intelligence services. You have an Inspector General in cases of abuses. You have the Parliamentary Oversight Committee in the cases to oversee budget, etc. So a very elaborate system of checks and balances were put into place to ensure that there's no abuse. But it was premised on an understanding that the intelligence services, and particularly the Director General, will be professional, will conduct themselves. We've stipulated all of that in the Constitution, that it'll do things by the law, etc. And it required for this entire architecture to work together. And I must say, for the first 3 or 4 years, in my view, and then I left, it was working together and there was maturation taking place.
You're now talking about
The 94,
90s.
97
Yeah.
years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, in relation to the separate functions of the executive and the minister and the operational functions of the intelligence services, you later illustrate an example of a clash.
Yes.
The relationship between yourself, at least, and Minister Pule was strained. We know that. What was the first indication of such strain?
Maybe
Deal with that in paragraph 40.
I'm sorry again, Mr. President. Maybe before that, let me ask this question. You have told me how in your view, this situation should be in terms of reporting and how it was originally after '94. And you did say the Minister of Justice was given the responsibility of administrative matters in relation to
Yes.
intelligence and not directing operations. Once there was a Minister of Intelligence, as you understood the structure, that is now even before we talk about what happened in reality, was your understanding that with the minister with there being a Minister of Intelligence, he or she might be involved in directing operations by virtue of being there as opposed to the president, or it wouldn't necessarily mean that he or she would be involved with directing operations? That could still be left to the director, to the head, but it would just depend maybe on the person, on the incumbent.
Yes, in this particular case, it is my evidence that the minister attempted to direct an operation, which I found to be unlawful, and we will come to that. And I would give you examples, and you can look again at various examples, and let me just give you one. And it is really unfortunate that the example I was going to use that has been raised by the former President Zuma. Former President Zuma made reference to spies in his evidence before the commission. Now, spies is the work of an intelligence service. You can imagine a situation where a Director General who is in charge of the intelligence service and counterintelligence and is now instructed by a minister to please provide him or her the name of spies in the country. And this is now given to a minister. That minister, because of changes in politics, leaves the government service. Does that minister forget about who the spies were or not? Or do they retain it in the head or in the thing? And what risk does that present to those spies in the country? So that's one example where it is very dangerous for a minister to demand operational knowledge about matters. But the president, when a president is no longer the president, there are certain protocols that go into effect to still keep that president as if he were in a previous, as if he still was a president. This is why the presidential protocols are so intense. So ex-President Mbeki, ex-President Motlanthe, all still have, to a certain degree, protection and the use of state in order to keep them. And one of the reasons is that they would have, in their capacity as presidents, come across very sensitive information of the state. A minister is not accorded that protection. A minister is not accorded that protocol, and God forbid, I am not suggesting that ex-ministers of intelligence are given this kind of protocol. I'm just saying don't appoint them in the first place.
But are you therefore saying that you could have a minister of intelligence without necessarily implying that he or she would direct operations?
Correct. You
Yeah,
could.
so in principle, you could have the minister.
In principle, you could, yes.
But when it comes to operational matters, he or she could not be involved there.
That's correct. And that is why I would argue, sir, that it is a member of cabinet.
Yes.
Not a member to cabinet.
Yes, yes.
If you get that subtle distinction. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You were going to tell the chair
Yes.
of the first incident which strained the relationship between yourself and others and the minister. In paragraph 14.
That's paragraph 14.
Mr. Pretorius, we're taking long on this, but I think it's very important for the understanding. You know, I certainly appreciate all the explanations that I'm getting in terms of intelligence.
Yes, if I may just say, Chair, there's a substantial amount of evidence to be given, and this background is very important in order to evaluate
Yes, that evidence, yeah. Okay.
It's essential.
Chair, you would recall that in 2009, during 2009, there was the Minister Kwele's wife was subject to a drug trafficking offense, and this matter related to the kind of protection or the kind of services that the SSA, and in particular the domestic branch of the SSA, was giving to Mrs. Kwele. We discussed this matter, and in particular it was a level of discomfort for Director Njenje, and he raised this matter with the DG Makatuka and myself, and we had a forum of meetings where we all three would decide on a particular way, and a dissension would meant we keep debating until we have consensus. We discussed this matter, we debated it, through all ends and concluded that we, the SSA, again under the leadership of Ambassador Makatuka, will inform the Minister that we will no longer be providing these protection services to Mrs. Twele, the Minister's wife. Of course, this did create...
Just articulate what the form of the protection was. Maybe I missed that. I think it's in your statement.
I'm also mindful, sir, of not giving the evidence of my colleagues
please,
who are here.
Please remember, I'm not... So, where we ask you questions that might compromise those things, please just remind me.
Okay.
We are not too used to those things, but too used to transparency.
Okay.
Very good. So if ever I ask you any question and you feel that it might require you to give information that you shouldn't give because it belongs to intelligence, please feel free to let me know. So if it's not something you can indicate, I was just thinking maybe police officers who and so on, but I leave it to you to...
No, we're not far off. My understanding is that the domestic branch of the State Security Agency provided a kind of logistical support in terms of transporting Mrs. Twele from the home to the court, from court back home, and all of these things incur expense. And that expense has to accrue to a particular operation, and Director Njenje had to sign off on it. I think it is his uncomfortableness about continually signing off these matters made him to initiate a discussion amongst the three of us, with all three of us agreeing to that this service should be terminated. Of course, the second and related issue is that we were management, or the senior management of an intelligence service, providing services to a person who was convicted for drug trafficking offenses. And this is not...
So this is now post the conviction?
This is, during the trial.
Oh, during the trial.
During the trial.
Yeah.
And with the presumption of innocence,
yes,
it was creating a sense of awkwardness to us, in sense of our own morality, so to speak. So this discussion had to happen with the Minister, and Director General Makatuka led that discussion, supported by Director Njenje.
Yes, you may continue.
Mr. Sheikh, in paragraph 15 you deal with certain changes made to the cabinet by former President Zuma in and around October 2010.
That is correct.
I'm sorry again, Mr. Pretorius. What you haven't said, and I don't know whether that's because of anything connected with intelligence, what you haven't said is what was the response of Minister Twele to the news that you had decided to terminate this support? That's something
that
you
is
can
a good
say?
question. I don't have that direct information.
Okay.
One
of the
I'm
other
sure
witnesses
that
might
it's
have.
coming by Makatuka and Gibson.
Okay.
You refer in paragraph 15 of your statement, Mr. Sheikh, to a cabinet reshuffle in and around October 2010 at the hands of the former President Zuma.
That is correct.
There's one particular appointment there that is relevant to your evidence. What was that?
That was I was saddened by the replacement by Minister Spiwe Nyanda by Mr. Padiachi, but that just saddened me. But the one that concerned me is the replacement of Fikile, or the appointment of Minister Fikile Mbulula.
There was a press report to which you refer in paragraph 16 in relation to the appointment. What was that?
So, sometime in 2011 was a press report that dealt with a NEC meeting of the ANC, in which it was alleged in that report that Minister Mbulula raised his appointment or been informed about his appointment by the Guptas, been called and informed about that appointment. And we had again under the leadership of Ambassador Makatuka, we established what we call the Monday Morning Forum, where the three of us, under his leadership, Makatuka, Gibson and I, would meet every Monday morning to discuss things that occurred in the weekend or in the past week. And it was a brainstorming session between the three of us. And then midday we will invite our deputies for lunch and others and have a kind of management meeting that will end sometime often late into the night. And this is the way we operated. So on this was a Sunday, so on the Monday we met and we discussed this report, and we were taken aback by the issues that were in that report.
What was the decision in relation to the matters that ought to be investigated? I'll ask you why.
So, as you'll recall, sir, that what was alleged in that report, that there was an NEC meeting, and in this meeting, Minister Mbulula raised the point that his appointment, he was notified of his appointment by one of the Gupta brothers, but generally for the purpose of this discussion, the Gupta brothers. Our concern was, this was either a breach of national security occurring in the office of the President. So there was a leak from the office of the President. 2, this is possible because the Guptas overheard this discussion while the President was in consultation with someone, and they obtained this information and were now peddling this information for whatever benefit they wanted. Or thirdly, that they in fact actually suggested this appointment, which makes this even more serious, because then as foreign nationals they are suggesting who should be in the national cabinet of another country. All three of these matters fall in the realm of national security, by my understanding. A leak from the President's office, information peddling if they have overheard this information, and 3, if they suggested the name, then this is a matter of counterintelligence where a foreign national is influencing the appointment of cabinet ministers of another government. All 3 issues needed to be investigated.
Did you discuss the intended approach with anyone else, for example, your Deputy Directors General?
Yes, so following our morning meeting, we had lunch with our Deputy Director Generals and others, and we informed them of our decision that an investigation into the Guptas should now occur based on the rationale that we have given. And I must say that an intelligence investigation is an intelligence investigation. It will involve technological intelligence, it will involve surveillance, it will involve penetration, it will involve having a full understanding of the whole picture to answer those 3 questions, primarily because it pertains to national security and a breach at the highest level of the government.
There was a related issue pertaining to the investigation.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius. Well, to those who are not close to intelligence and secret services, to those of us who are not close to those to intelligence, it might not have been as apparent as it now seems to me and others who are listening to evidence, what this could mean if it meant that the Gupta brothers, or one of them, was able to overhear sensitive information emanating from somebody in the presidency or from the president, because today it might have been about the appointment of so-and-so as a minister, but tomorrow it might have been information about something that really goes to the security of the country.
Yes.
So it was quite something, quite serious even from that angle, leaving out the others.
It is a very serious issue, sir. And let me tell you, of the three scenarios, the overhearing the discussion is the least of the dangerous ones, right? Because if they've overheard it, and if we have investigated and were allowed to investigate this, we would be able to make certain recommendations as intelligence normally do. We will make recommendations in terms of how to avoid this situation in future. So that didn't happen. But the second option, the option that if the appointment occurred at the suggestion of the Guptas, then that is a significantly serious matter. Because it meant that there is real possibility that a foreign government was making appointments.
No, I think that scenario is the one that has been dealt with quite extensively in the public domain.
Yes.
Of course, any president who gets an inappropriate suggestion like that would respond in the only way that's appropriate for that situation. But of course, you could have various people, who may innocuously at one stage or another say to the president, you know what, Mr. Sheikh would be good for the police, maybe next time you think about reshuffling the cabinet, think about him, here is his track record. As long as the president doesn't feel bound to do that, yes. I would imagine that that's not a problem. Is that right?
Correct. That's yes. Absolutely correct. And in fact, it does occur in our media where editors or journalists would make certain suggestions that in order to fix this and this department up, appoint so-and-so to that department. And that is considered democratic lobbying, which is not necessarily a counterintelligence matter. No, but it's done openly, it's done transparently, and it's done also, it may even happen behind closed doors. That too is not a problem. The problem here, in my opinion, was the fact that the people who were making the suggestion, if they indeed made the suggestion, found it necessary to inform the person who was appointed before he was appointed that he was going to be appointed. So the benefit was not a contribution towards good governance. The benefit was to demonstrate that they had knowledge of the appointment before the appointment occurs.
Well, that's quite important, but maybe you use in your evidence the word suggestion. Maybe it should be something much more than a suggestion, because a suggestion implies that it's just an idea, you know. But maybe if it became something more than a suggestion, maybe even an instruction, you know, that maybe that's where the problem becomes even
Correct.
more difficult, because my friends might make suggestions about certain things in my company or in my department as minister, but you know, as long as they are just suggestions and nothing more, I don't feel bound, and those people don't think that they can dictate to me what I do. That might be fine. The problem might be where the suggestion is no longer a suggestion, it's an instruction, or where the president, whoever it may be in that situation, may feel bound to give effect to the suggestion because
Correct.
of whatever. You know.
Yes.
But part of the importance of what you say about what you think the rationale must have been for them to then go to the person to be appointed to demonstrate that they had the knowledge,
Yes.
may well link with what Mr. Ramatloti said in this commission when he gave evidence about and expressed his views about the waterproof lending. Because, and I remember it because last week I dealt with it when Minister Maite Nkwane Mashabane was here, was that he was saying that lending, as far as he was concerned, wasn't just the lending of that aircraft. It was the Gupta family showing the whole country and the world that they might not be president, but they lend where presidents lend. In other words, they were in charge. I hope I'm not misrepresenting, but that's how I understood Mr. Ramatlodi's evidence to be, to say they were telling everybody, we are in charge. So when you then say, if they get knowledge by whatever means that the president intends to appoint so and so as minister, and then they go to that person to share that information, it may be that you are right, that the motive is a very wrong one.
So in intelligence, we make use of a word called created dependency.
What's the word?
Created dependencies.
Yes.
I'm absolutely convinced that the need for the Gupta brothers to tell Minister Fikile Mbulula that he was going to be the Minister of Sport was to determine a created dependency. That created dependency was to extract value from him being the Minister of Sport. And of course, if one looks at the business investments of the Guptas, they were in cricket, in sport stadiums. So the benefit was to extract value. If he was made the Minister of Water, well, I don't know, but but if he was made the Minister of Water, I don't think they would have informed him. The portfolio of sport is related to their business interest, and they needed to create dependency of him onto them so that when they do come back on the value, that he would felt obliged to respond because of the created dependency. And please don't get me wrong, sir, I'm not saying that it happened. I'm saying the mechanism by which we from intelligence would have seen it.
Well, That's quite important, but I'm looking at other evidence, and that's part of what I've got to do is not look at evidence in isolation. I've got to look at all the evidence and where there are links, link them. I have had evidence where, of course, the public knows about the evidence of Mr. Jonas, which was to the effect that he was taken to a meeting at the Gupta residence, and that Mr. Duduzane Zuma was there when a Gupta brother, one of the Gupta brothers, said they wanted to make him Minister of Finance, and said Minister Nene would be dropped from cabinet or dismissed, whatever the term was that they used, and that he was, they wanted him to be the new minister. And it seems that you would be talking about the same thing, to say maybe they wanted, if he accepted, they wanted to make sure that when he became Minister of Finance, he would remember that
Yes.
they made him Minister of Finance.
Correct.
And therefore he would feel some loyalty towards them, and there would be some dependence, because if they made him minister, they could unmake him minister. They could have him dismissed.
Correct.
So one has that, and then of course you have other situations where somebody who is in a certain position, like Mr. Saluji, who was Group CEO of Denel at a certain stage, was brought, I think by Mr. Essa, I'm not sure, to a meeting, I think at the Gupta residence, and at one of the meetings, Minister Gigaba, who was Minister of Public Enterprises, I think, was there. He was brought at the time, but according to the evidence, not much happened, but apparently he did say something like, I hope you people can work well, or something like that. I can't remember. But also you have an occasion when Mr. Saluji was brought into a meeting at the Gupta residence, and Mr. Duduzane Zuma was present, but there's not much according to the evidence that he said, but he was present.
Yes.
And then you have Mr. Dugwana, former MEC in the Free State government, who was taken to the Gupta residence, and according to him, at least on one of the occasions, Mr. Duduzane Zuma was there, but not much, he didn't say much there. So one doesn't know whether even the presence of Mr. Duduzane Zuma at some of these meetings where certain people are brought in was meant to convey the message, a certain message to the people. So I was just mentioning because I thought what you said might be linked to those scenarios.
Thank you.
Perhaps, Chair, Mr. Sheikh was being polite in the way he expressed his views earlier on, but I'm sure you've disabused him of the need.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Mr. Sheikh, there was another reason for the investigation which you relate in paragraphs 20 and 21. Please tell the Chair about that.
Chair, you'll recall that at the particular time in multilateral affairs, the U.S. administration under then President Barack Obama was engaging with negotiations in respect of Iran to lift the sanctions that was in place on Iran because of the attempts within the Iranian government to build its nuclear facilities outside of the regulatory procedures. I was approached.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sheikh. Just to close off the issue relating to the newspaper article which talked about Mr. Mbalula having been informed of his pending appointment by the Gupta brothers.
Yes.
You haven't told me. You said you decided to investigate, but you haven't told me about what happened. Is that because it's a sensitive, it's an intelligence matter? Because otherwise, we lawyers want to close all gaps. We want to hear the whole story. So I say, somebody reading the transcript would say, he said they investigated, they decided to investigate, and what happened? And nobody asked what happened.
Said, you recall that after our Monday morning forum meetings, we had lunch with our Deputy Director Generals. We agreed on the investigation. It was supported by our Deputy Director Generals, and related to that investigation is another aspect which I'm now...
To which you will come?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so at some stage, you'll be able to either tell me what happened to that investigation or to tell me for certain intelligence reasons you might not be able to tell.
Correct.
Okay.
Or to tell you what didn't happen.
So,
yes.
in relation, I was approached by the then U.S. ambassador stationed in Pretoria that the State Department is concerned about the possible funding of Shiva uranium, which is a Gupta-owned mine, and they had reason to believe that such financing may be coming from Iran, and they are concerned. This is, when I say they, I mean the United States is concerned, because it's a very sensitive time in the negotiations with Iran in regard to the discussions about lifting of the sanctions and coming up with a new approach to Iran. And if this is the case, then they didn't know whether to interpret this as Iran going rogue, or what is the situation, and could we determine whether Iranian funding is in fact behind Shiva uranium.
What would the consequences for South Africa be if this scenario were correct?
The consequence for South Africa would have been enormous. One, we would have been seen to be going rogue in violation of multilateral agreements, and such violations would have consequences. And of course, it would be enormous financial consequences to the country if sanctions were then by necessarily extended to South Africa. So it was another aspect of intelligence that needed to be dealt with. And this is a very good example of how intelligence services work. Although in this case the approach was from the State Department to me via the ambassador. And in my evidence I also point, and I'm sure it's going to be led by Director Janjay, that they too were approached directly by American intelligence to determine the source of this funding on the uranium mines.
You say in paragraph 21 that you did discuss this concern with the President at the time.
That is correct.
And you were given certain reassurances.
That is correct.
To the effect of?
That the Iranians are not behind Shiva uranium funding.
Right, so as I understand it, the decision was made for more than one reason to conduct an investigation.
That is correct.
You say in paragraph 23 that shortly after this decision was made, certain things happened. What
yes.
happened?
I can't recall whether it happened on the same day or the day after, but a few days after that meeting that we took to investigate the Gupta family, Mr. Makatuka informed both Mr. Njenje and I that we are required to fly urgently to Cape Town, where the minister has summoned a meeting of us in Cape Town. So we flew to Cape Town that evening, and we arrived there at night for a meeting with the minister.
Before you get to the contents of the meeting, Mr. Sheikh, there are two issues that perhaps you should inform the chair of. The first is, how frequently would a minister take steps to call to account operational executives in operational matters? Was this a common occurrence?
Well, this is the first that has happened to me, but during the period in which I was the head of the Secret Service or the foreign branch of the SSA, I was never called to explain an operation. So this is the first operation that Minister Kwele deemed it necessary for me or for us to come explain.
The second point is,
Now, which year was this? I don't think your statement specifies.
It's 2011.
2011. Okay. You wouldn't remember what month and so on, or first part?
I think these are now in the latter months of 2011.
Yeah, okay.
Because by 2012, I was history.
Okay.
Mr. Sheikh, would you comment then on the basis of your own knowledge and experience in relation to intelligence matters on the appropriateness or otherwise of a minister becoming involved in operational matters?
The Chair, I found it inappropriate. I would go so far as to say illegal, but then I would have required the courage to go and prove that illegality in a court, and it's just going to be a messy affair. But it is not done like that. The better way would have to been to await the outcome of the investigation and then dealt with the issues of the investigation, dealt with the recommendations of the investigation. But making known your view of an investigation on a matter of national security when you are the Minister of National Security is an indictment also on your understanding of national security.
That is before we get to the actual content of the discussion.
Yes, I'm
Yes,
coming there
okay.
now. It's just a matter of general principle.
No, that's fine.
Mr. Sheikh, what was the tone of the meeting?
Well, the meeting was extremely confrontational, extremely confrontational. The minister...
I just want to say, I know it happened a long time ago, but the more you are able to tell me about the details of the discussion and the tone, the better. So I get as good a picture of how the meeting was as you have.
Okay. So when we arrived, so the minister has a holding room. We were in the holding room, and the minister then, I think there was a meal provided for us, and from there we went into the minister's meeting room. The minister attended that meeting with two people. One was appropriately now Ambassador Zlomo, who is South Africa's ambassador to Algeria, who at that time was a special advisor to the minister. And he also attended the meeting by Dr. Kao Mavangu. There was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Kao Just the surname just escapes me, but I will get
Mabanga?
it.
Or Mabanga? I'm just
No.
thinking of surnames along those lines.
Mavungu, but I will check.
You'll
and
check,
I will confirm the surname.
Yes.
But there was Dr. Kao.
And what was his
he's
position?
a member. He was the head of the ministerial services and a member of the service, and in particular a member of the foreign service. When
Which fell under you? Which fell under you?
Yes, which fell under me.
Yes.
So when we started the meeting, we objected to his presence on the basis that he's a junior official. We are going to be discussing, because the minister indicated that he wanted to discuss the Gupta matter, our Gupta investigation, and I'm not too sure whether it's the Director General who insisted or I insisted that Dr. Kao please leave the room on the basis that he's an official from the service, and we wouldn't want to have that discussion. Insofar as Ambassador Zlomo was concerned, Ambassador Zlomo just returned from a posting at a multilateral intelligence multilateral institution, and we found it acceptable for him to be present in the meeting insofar as him being an advisor to the minister, but with no participation rights.
But the other one did agree to leave?
Yes, he did agree to leave, yeah. So the minister wanted to hear from Ambassador Matretuka what are the reasons behind the investigation. Ambassador Matretuka took him through our thinking.
How did he know about it, about the decision to investigate? Had Ambassador Matretuka told him, or how had that, because you said you had just made the decision before, or is it me showing my ignorance about intelligence?
No, you're showing your intelligence about intelligence matters. The minister was informed.
Yes.
We have not
Officially?
No, the minister was informed by someone present at the meeting. We were unable to determine who informed the minister, but it was clear that the minister was informed from a participant in the meeting.
Okay. So he asked, you wanted to be told
Yes,
about this decision.
correct.
And you were saying Ambassador Matretuka took
So
him through.
Ambassador Matretuka led the argument, and essentially which are the arguments that we have covered to now, national security, and I think in that meeting, and again Ambassador Matretuka will go into it, that there were other noises around the Gupta family. This matter needed to be investigated. It was ultimately in the interest of the president that this investigation happens, because either the investigation is going to find that there is nothing to the story, and if there's nothing to the story, then the president is in a sense cleared by the intelligence services. If there was something to the story, then there were corrective action that could be taken. But I must confess, Chair, that the minister was having none of it. Reason left the room when we entered, and we couldn't find each other. In fact, it deteriorated, where the minister made this matter incredibly personal. He argued that the reason why we're doing this investigation is because we want to pursue or further the business objectives of Mr. Jenje. We all, by this time, in fairness to Mr. Jenje, I've never seen him more angry than I have seen him in that meeting. Ambassador Matretuka denied that. I denied that. We were not furthering the business interest of Director Jenje. In fact, when we had our early morning discussion, it was Director Jenje who placed on record his conflict and what his involvement, and I won't say involvement, his interaction with how it came to be that he interacted with the Guptas and what was behind it, etc. And we were very satisfied with his explanation. And if anything, in deference to him, he wanted us to ensure that that does not feature in the investigation. So if anything, it was completely the opposite to what the minister was alleging. Again, we tried to explain to the minister, and again the minister did not listen. It seemed to me that the minister did not want this investigation to happen, for reasons that I'm sure the minister would explain. I can only but speculate, but he did not want this investigation to happen, and the meeting was incredibly tense.
Well, if somebody, if you come to know that the police or any official agency of the state is conducting some investigation, and you may be the subject of the investigation, and you know that they will find nothing. I wonder why you would say stop the investigation. You may or may not be able to comment on this, but I'm trying to understand why, if the senior management of intelligence take a decision such as this, on the face of it, in good faith to do their job, why anybody could say stop it if, as far as they know, the investigation will find that nobody did anything wrong, or particular people didn't do anything wrong. Because if you say it must be stopped, you leave a question mark about the person or persons who were to be investigated. But if you allow it to continue and it finds out that it clears them, then the whole thing is buried. But you might be able to say something. You have done a lot of investigations, I'm sure.
I am for me, and again I would speculate, I think it goes again to one of the reasons why you shouldn't have a Minister of Intelligence. Because a minister serves at the favor or behest of a president, and therefore would seek to either ingratiate themselves or would seek to get favor from a president. The Director General of an Intelligence Services serves the national interest of the country. And often those two things, serving the national interest versus serving the favors of a president, may not be
they might not coincide.
They may not coincide. And I think this is a classical example where the national interest was undermined in order for favor.
Yes, continue.
How long did this meeting last?
To best of my understanding, I think it could have been an hour to about 2 hours. An hour to 2 hours.
So, was the only reason that the minister advanced for saying that the investigation should be stopped, that it was an investigation intended to benefit Mr. Njenje, or it was driven by him, whatever he said. Is that the only reason he gave, or are there other reasons that he gave? Because I would like to know if there were other reasons and be able to assess their validity.
I think he also gave the reason that he didn't deem it necessary, that in terms of the media scoping, etc., he didn't see that the scoping exercise that we did in respect of, this is what's been said in the media, he didn't see it threatening national security. He didn't see it as we seen it. And he was, I think, willing to say that these are matters that are political matters, that the report in the paper are political matters which shouldn't require attention. And I actually got the sense that the minister didn't believe that which was being alleged was in fact turned out to be true. So I don't think he believed the allegation, and therefore he was dismissive of it. Whereas we, on the other hand, didn't take a view about whether the allegations in the media was to be believed or not to be believed. We took the view that the matter should be investigated so that we could arrive at an objective understanding of what in fact occurred.
Of course, if he didn't believe what was being alleged and no investigation was done, and it turned out that he was wrong in not believing what was alleged, the consequences could be and could have been disastrous. So is the position not that he ought to have sought to err on the side of caution and say, well, I don't believe it, but if these three senior people who have a lot of experience in intelligence, believe there should be an investigation, I should leave it to them? Because if they find out that there is no problem, then it's fine.
Absolutely correct. And again, not to take any perverse pleasure from this, it did turn out to be correct. It was a disaster. And as a result, I'm sitting before you on a matter of state capture. And I think in fairness, if we were allowed to do the investigation, we may, I'm not saying it would necessarily be the case, we may be talking about different things now.
Well, that's quite important, Mr. Sheikh, and it goes back to an issue I raised with you much earlier. Well, I mentioned to you, namely, you must tell me if I think I mentioned, but I didn't mention it. Namely, I talked about, I think, the role of Parliament in terms of its oversight obligations. Well, I didn't refer to oversight obligations, but what I was talking about is part of oversight, namely about the votes of no confidence and so on and so on. So one of the things that I believe I will have to look into if I come to the conclusion that yes, there was state capture or something that shouldn't have happened and that happened, I may have to say, how did it happen? Who are the possible role players who could have prevented it from happening? And what mechanisms were in place that could have been used to prevent it from happening? Were those mechanisms used effectively? And hence one could look at Parliament's performance of its oversight obligations in regard to when did they start suspecting state capture, what did they do about it? Same thing when it comes to the levels of corruption in the country and all of that. What did they do? What are they doing when what do they do when they execute their oversight obligations? So you say here here we were from the intelligence community, being senior managers, having a meeting with the minister. We had made a decision that this could pose a national security issue and it should be investigated. We've decided to investigate it, but here is the Minister of Intelligence to whom we report, who says no, it should not happen.
Yes.
And you say, with the benefit of hindsight, you say, well, looking at what subsequently happened, indeed, there is a chance that if we had been allowed to conduct our investigations, there is a chance that maybe we could have come up with recommendations or that could have prevented it from happening, or even if it did not prevent it completely, but maybe it might have been limited and not have gone as far as it did. So I'm just saying that what you are saying is quite important, because it throws light also on that, because to the extent that there was state capture and so on, we need to know where did we go wrong, who was supposed to do what, who didn't do their job, and if they had done their job, could we have been here, and so on. So that's quite important.
Chair, I just want to add that, and in this case, I would be as direct as I could be. I think it does constitute a dereliction of duty on the part of the minister. Having assumed the function of the minister and intervening in the way he did, he did cause grievous harm to the well-being of the state. Because immediately after this incident was, of course, the waterproof landing incident. Now, I wonder, the waterproof landing incident for me, which is also of deep concern, because it's a military air force. It is not a normal air force. It is a military air force in which, to enter a military air force, its airspace, etc., requires a phenomenal amount of intervention. I think that was, again, an incredible narcissistic demonstration of power, unnecessary, and it should not have happened. It was a violation of national security, and if we were allowed to have done our investigation, I don't think you would have had, at least for sure, you would have had the Watergate affair, the waterproof affair. I must say on record, sir, because, and I know I'm stretching it here, that it is common practice of ministers to assume the power and responsibility and the perks that come with the jobs of being ministers, but then are the first to cry that they did not know when there are problems. How could you not know that an aeroplane was landing at a military airbase? How could you not know? And now I accept that Ambassador Bruce Kolwane, and I know him, and he was a great ambassador. He was a very effective ambassador. He was a very effective officer of protocol. But I think in one of your recommendations, if you do indeed make recommendations, DJ, that this notion where officials take the fall for the errors of their politicians, I think we should bring that to an end. We should bring that to an end. Do not become a politician if you do not want to take responsibility. Take the credit, take the risk, but also take the responsibility and the obligations that come with your office. Don't pass that obligation or don't pass the blame onto officials when you know that, essentially you are not owning up to your own responsibilities as ministers. And I think in both those cases, these are classic examples where ministers don't own up to the responsibility of their office.
Well, that's quite important, but it touches upon something that I raised with Minister Maite Mashabane last week, who was here to give her side of the story, to say why she recommended to the then president that Mr. Kolwane be made ambassador after what had happened, and his role in the waterproof landing being known insofar as he had confessed to certain things and made certain admissions. Of course, as we all know, there is the question of whether the president at the time knew about this or did not know about it. Of course, Mr. Kolwane had told certain officials in Waterkloof that in effect the president knew, or that he had been told by one or other minister that he knew and wanted this to happen. Of course, later on he said, no, that was just him lying and so on and so on. So, but we're dealing with the matter on the basis that assume that the president did not know, and assume that Mr. Kolwane was right, that this was his whole idea. But how could you then get this same guy promoted? And you yourself say the appointment as an ambassador is an honor. And you say yourself that you knew before you made the recommendation that this person had admitted to lying about this, something as important as this, and you accept that the person did not have integrity. You accept that to be an ambassador you must have integrity. How could you then go to the president and recommend that the same person should be made president? That's what we were discussing. And I raised the issue about values, you say, ministers have got to take responsibility. I mean, you would know that, some people will take responsibility and will say, leave my junior staff and whatever, I made this decision. I take responsibility. I accept whatever criticism. Correct. As opposed to those who want to come in only when there is credit and shift out of line, move out of line when there are problems, and then push junior officials forward to say they must take responsibility. So I certainly believe that accountability is critical in our democracy, and that it starts with being able to stand up for what you believe is right. And if you believe what you stand for is right, you say, this is what I believe. If you get persuaded differently, then you say, now I've changed my mind because I've been persuaded otherwise. But the question of senior leaders hiding behind junior officials, I think, is unfortunate. So I understand what you mean, and
thank you, sir.
I think people must take responsibility for their own roles in whatever. Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair. You will recall a few minutes ago, Mr. Sheikh, that you gave evidence in general terms about the principles which adhered to the relationship between a minister on the one hand and the operational executives on the other. At this meeting in Cape Town, did the minister say anything about his authority and whether investigations could or could not be conducted without his authority?
Yes, there was a debate about that, but by that time the meeting deteriorated, where the minister is saying, I'm instructing you not to continue this investigation. And I think at that point we became uncharacteristically, in the case of my two colleagues, uncharacteristically equally impolite, saying we are going to investigate, and we couldn't move past that point. And then I think it was Ambassador Makatuka who then made the suggestion that we would rather prefer to discuss this with the President directly.
In the sense that the meeting in Cape Town resulted or did not result in any agreed way forward, was the issue between yourselves on the one hand and the Minister on the other resolved?
No, the matter was not resolved. We didn't accept not to, we did not accept to stop the investigation. We did get the opportunity to get a meeting with the President, and the Minister undertook to arrange that meeting with the President. So the matter was, so to speak, pushed up the ranks for discussion with the President.
Right. Have you any idea from that meeting or elsewhere where the Minister would have received information about the business interests of Director Njenje?
Well, I can only but assume that he may have received that information from the Guptas themselves.
Have you any idea of what the intelligence capabilities of the Gupta family were?
The Gupta family at that time was deploying a large amount of security personnel, and often these security personnel also engage in information gathering, not of a very good quality, mainly speculation and rumor mongering, etc. And I did pick up that the Gupta family had a kind of intelligence operation going, but I didn't put much reliance on it. And I must say I should have, much to my detriment, but I didn't put any much reliance on it. And in fact, subsequently I found out that it was that intelligence capability that informed the President that there is a possible grouping of people who want to topple him. In fact, I too was accused of being one of the people who was planning to topple President Zuma.
Is this now around 2011?
It's around 2011.
Yes.
Yeah, 2011. Late 2011, yeah.
Yes, okay.
In relation to whether or not the Minister had the authority either to instruct or to stop an investigation, and in relation to the issue as to whether operational executives were entitled to conduct an investigation without the authority of the Minister, what was the position put by yourself and your two colleagues?
The position, to the best of my recall, is that the Minister does not have that authority. We will continue with this investigation subject to a discussion with the President.
How did the meeting end?
Coldly.
Just repeat.
Coldly. I think we all got up and none of us said our goodbyes in a very polite manner, and we just left.
I thought at some stage during the meeting, the way you're describing it, there must have been quite some heat in the meeting. So later on it was cold.
This is cold.
Are you done with the meeting? If you
no,
still...
not entirely. Just
Okay.
one more question.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
In relation to whether the investigations should continue or should be stopped, I think you've told the Chair that no agreement was reached in that regard.
That's correct.
What was the position of yourself and your two colleagues in that regard?
We were of the opinion that we will continue with the investigation. that the justification that we had was legitimate, and that the justification for the investigation was legitimate and warranted the investigation, and that we should get the investigation going. However, we wanted to meet with the President because by making the position that the Minister does not have authority over to direct operations, then who does? Of course, the President does, and we would therefore wanted to raise this matter directly with the President to continue this operation.
That was the outstanding question.
Yes, I just want to put the version of Ambassador Makatuka.
Yeah, do that because that's what I had in mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
As you've told the Chair, there will be further evidence in relation to this meeting, and I would just like to put to you the version of that meeting as testified to by Ambassador Makatuka.
As contained in his statement.
Yes, and I will give you a copy of his statement
Okay.
now.
You said as testified to.
In his statement, yes, I
Yeah.
apologize. As to be testified, perhaps.
Well, did you put a question or you're still looking for?
I'd like him to have the benefit of the
Oh, okay.
in case he wishes
Yeah.
to comment.
Yeah, okay. Side so you can help. One of you must be their side so you can help with. If the witness needs to be assisted, it's much better if there's somebody this side.
I understand. My authority doesn't always extend that far. Certainly in operational matters.
I thought the leader of the team can direct how the members of the team, where the members of the team sit.
So I will take note of that, courage from that.
Yes.
In regard to the meeting,
Well, he might need a few minutes to have a look if he hasn't seen it before.
No, I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
would you just
have a
look at paragraph 6 and 7? That's all you need to look at.
Okay.
For the moment, at any rate.
Yes, correct.
Paragraph 6, the following statement is made. I informed the team, that is yourself and Mr. Njenje, that while the investigation was still ongoing, the then Minister for Intelligence Services, Siyabonga Cwele, apparently got wind of the investigation and summoned us to a meeting in Cape Town. That's consistent with what you have said.
That's correct.
He says the meeting started in the early evening and went on till about midnight. I don't think much turns on that. The next sentence he says the
Well,
minister...
I'm sorry, that might be important because you thought it took about an hour or so.
No, I said at least 2 hours.
Hour or
that
two,
is-
you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there was dinner and so forth, so,
Or after
Yeah.
the meeting.
yes.
Oh.
No, there was dinner before the meeting.
Or
Right,
before
so
the
that-
meeting.
So it went on quite late.
Or so.
Yeah.
So from the time you arrived
Correct.
to the time you left, it might have been beyond midnight or
That's
whatever.
correct,
But
yeah.
the actual discussion may have been about an hour or so.
About 2 hours.
About 2
Yeah,
hours.
yeah.
Okay.
The statement continues in paragraph 6. The minister introduced the reason why he had called us as the fact that Njenje was undertaking an investigation of the relationship between President J.G. Zuma and the Guptas, and that Njenje was conducting this investigation for his own business interest. Your comment in that regard?
That's correct.
That's correct, you say. Paragraph 7, I insisted to the minister that this was not Njenje's investigation, but that of the SSA in terms of its mandate.
Correct?
The minister continued, my apologies. This the minister ignored, and he continued with his line of addressing the issues on Njenje.
That's correct.
The meeting ended without resolving the matter. So far, it seems that you're in broad agreement at least. Later, we learnt from the media that the minister had instructed us to stop the investigation. I have to say that I do not recall him having given such an instruction, let alone that a minister for intelligence would have no mandate to stop an investigation where the organization had assessed the need to so investigate. It seems that there's some difference between your recollection and the recollection of Ambassador Matuka.
No, I don't see a substantially different.
Well, he says he doesn't recall such an instruction being given to stop the investigation.
Well, the minister was insisting that we do not continue with the investigation.
So your recollection is clear?
That is what I was recalling, yes.
Yes.
And he was giving reasons that the investigation is related to the business interests of Director Njenje. And we were arguing that it is the national security imperative that is driving the investigation, or the need for the investigation.
Well, there might be significance in establishing whether he was giving an instruction, or he was saying this must stop, with a view to giving instructions, or whether he was simply expressing a view that was contrary to the view of the three of you, and saying he thought there was no need for it for whatever reason. So I don't know whether Ambassador Matuka may be seeking to make a distinction when he says he doesn't remember or recall the minister giving instruction, whether he means whatever he may have said, he didn't view as an instruction.
Yes.
But he may have expressed his views, which were to the effect that he was against you continuing with the investigation, but maybe he viewed them as nothing more than the minister's views. So I don't know whether that's the angle, but I emphasize it to you for purposes of you being able to say whether, as far as your recollection is concerned, you are quite clear that the minister was saying stop this thing, as opposing to just giving his own views, or whether he was giving his views and nothing more.
Correct. I mean, and also I must say that as the head of the foreign branch, I wasn't directly in the firing line, so to speak. I was there in the support line. And the minister would, if he was going to instruct, the minister could have written this in a letter to say, I hereby instruct you not to engage in this investigation. And best of my recollection, I don't think that happened. But what I understood from the forcefulness from which the minister was debating with us, the manner of the debate, the level of his questioning, he in no uncertain term expressed an incredible unhappiness about our wanting to investigate, and I read from that he wanted us not to investigate, and I view that as an instruction not to investigate.
So, to the extent that there might be a debate about whether what he said amounted to an instruction, verbal instruction, as opposed to a written instruction, to the extent that there might be a debate about that, maybe in terms of your version and Ambassador Maqetuga's version. Is it possible that what there should be no debate about, as far as you are concerned, among the three of you, is that the minister sought to put a lot of pressure on the three of you to stop the investigation?
Sure.
There should be no
There's
debate
no debate about
that.
that.
There should be no debate about that.
At least from my point of view,
Yes,
no
yes,
debate about that.
yeah. Throughout, it was quite clear he was putting a lot of pressure.
Correct.
Yes. Whether you say that amounted to an instruction or not,
Yes.
might be another
Correct.
thing, but he was putting a lot of pressure, and all three of you should probably agree on that.
Correct.
Okay.
By way of summary, then, we have a meeting that took place for up to 2 hours or more than 2 hours. What was the essential point of difference between the three executives and the minister?
We believe that as a result of the analysis of open source information that we had and other information, that there was a justifiably warranted investigation that should be conducted by the intelligence services with its full capacity into the Guptas. The minister's position was that he did not think that the evidence warranted an investigation, and he expressed his unhappiness to us in no uncertain terms about our desire to continue with that investigation.
You've given evidence that the meeting was, to say the least, confrontational and adversarial.
That's correct.
Strong views were expressed.
That is correct.
Did you ever take a position which showed that you had been persuaded by the minister's views?
I'm sorry, sir?
Did you agree at any stage with the minister's stance?
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Did
Not-
he at
not
any
me.
stage agree with the stance that you had taken, that is, the three of you?
I thought at one moment in the discussion that the way we put our argument was compelling, and that he would have to agree to do this. But he opened a door slightly that yes, this may warrant a look into it, but then he closed that door immediately and focused again on J&J. So at that point, we were lost.
So over the period of the meeting, in quite confrontational circumstances and confrontationally expressed, is it your evidence then that the minister persisted in his view that the investigation should not take place, and you persisted in your views that it should take place?
That is correct.
Well, to the extent that you might not have given me the details I'm going to ask for, I would like them, because it may be difficult to make a determination between putting pressure in a meeting, putting pressure to stop the investigation, and expressing views which were contrary to the three of you, but doing so firmly. So you said that the meeting was confrontational. Are there some things that you can remember that so-and-so said this or did this? You might not have the banging of the table or anything like that.
Okay.
But I just want to get that picture, if you are able to remember, somebody, how this was, how the confrontational condition or atmosphere of the meeting manifested itself in terms of the discussion, in terms of the interaction.
The one example that comes to mind is that when the minister started to give reasons that it is Mr. Jenja's business interest that's driving this investigation and not the national security imperative. Ambassador Matlatuka countered by saying, but Director Njenje explained fully and fully disclosed this to us, and we are convinced that it has nothing to do with his business interests at all. I think Director Njenje entered the discussion as well, and he tried to convince the minister that this is absolutely not the case. And the minister was having none of it. So at some point, the minister said, no, you are conflicted on this matter. And the debate went around and around whether there was a conflict, whether no conflict, whether the business interest was driving the investigation or not. But the minister did not want to listen to the fact that we needed to investigate the Guptas. Did not.
And in the course of the discussion, did he mention, if you are able to remember, that this investigation should be stopped or anything like that? I think effectively that's what you say his stance was, but
yes,
I'm wondering what terminology he was using.
Yeah. At the level of the discussion, I'm trying to now just do a memory recall. At the level of the interaction between us as Director Generals and him as Minister, often there is a language that is spoken amongst, if I express my unhappiness on a matter, I'm literally telling you, you are not going to proceed any further. And I, on the other hand, will tell you, no, I am going to proceed any further. Then you now pushed it to the barrel where the next step is the written word. I instruct you not to do this, right? I think we were becoming close to the written word.
Yes.
But the disagreement was tactfully around a very important mandate. Do you, Minister, have the authority to instruct on an operation or not? And we were, you can say what you want to say, but we're going to continue this, and the only person who can tell us not to do this is the President, because he is responsible for the direction of the intelligence services. So we avoided a overt confrontation with the Minister, or an absolute breakdown where it now has to go to the passage of letters. And I'm up to this day do not know whether letters did cross the table.
Yes.
And our way out was with the meeting with the President.
But the issue that the minister did not have the authority to stop the investigation, that you raised as the three, raised with him.
Yes, correct.
Yes, and I have a sense that you wouldn't raise it unless you believed he was trying to stop the investigation.
That is correct. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. That is correct, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, again, I would repeat, in my understanding, interpretation, language, the culture of intelligence, the minister was unambiguous in his unhappiness about the investigation. And as a result, the view that we were left with is that he does not want this investigation to continue. There's no doubt about that.
There's no doubt about that.
None whatsoever.
Mr. Pretorius, I see we are at 4:09.
Yes.
From my side, if it's fine with everybody, we can continue and try and finish with him. I don't know what your situation is. I don't know what Mr. Sheikh's situation is. How long do you think we need for him to finish? In the end, we must do justice to the matter, so that's important. But well, while you are looking, maybe Mr. Sheikh, if we continue for another 30, 40 minutes, 45, maybe up to an hour to finish, would that suit you?
Fine.
That would be fine from your side.
That's fine. We still have to consult with Ambassador Matlatuka
Yes.
But
No, if the arrangement was that if we don't finish, he's available tomorrow, we can continue, continue tomorrow. That's fine. But I just thought that since we have got two other witnesses, it may be that it's better to finish with his evidence today. But I'm not rigid.
well, Chair, can I suggest a compromise, because there is a substantial amount of evidence still to come.
Yeah.
The statement is in parts quite terse.
Yes.
And I would also like to canvass with Mr. Sheikh certain issues arising out of the evidence of the former president, which might fall peculiarly within his knowledge. So that's in addition to the statement. So it's not just a matter of the remaining parts of the statement, but there are issues on which I would ask leave to ask further questions.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
And one set of questions that is not contained in the statement.
Yes. No,
So may I
I'm
suggest
easy.
5 o'clock?
That's fine. I didn't expect we would go beyond 5 o'clock, but as you say, you know more than I do now. There may be other matters that you want to raise. I'm quite happy that we go up to 5 o'clock. Is that so? And then if we don't finish, then subject to his availability tomorrow, he
that
can.
accords with the availability.
If we don't finish by 5 o'clock, would you be available tomorrow morning to finish?
Sure, I would make arrangements.
You would make arrangements?
Yes,
That's all subject to the absolute unreliability of council's predictions in relation to time.
Yes. Okay, all right, let's continue then. Or
next-
maybe we should take a little bit of a 10 minutes break,
As you please.
and then is 10 minutes fine?
Yes.
Okay, let's well, it's about 12 minutes past. I'll just say let's come back at 25 past.
Thank you, Chair.
25%.
Yeah, 25 past. We adjourn.
All rise.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot for I told my kids to take care of themselves. Paul wants me.
But I'm not sure we'll resolve it, but
I don't know if it's ever going to resolve because the patient has things to evaluate. To check if she has responded to our letter. And there was no response to any of the letters from 12 o'clock this afternoon. And then she sent me a response saying she never said she had the objects. All that she said was that she has the key, which is a lie. So she has received a response, a letter from these attorneys from Sugona. They are saying she doesn't have the staff, she only has the key. And she has copied their letter, their response to us. And she says, I can't help you. So that's what it is. is the letter to, sorry, the letter
I hear you. Let's talk about it. So someone
Okay, let's proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sheikh, just one question on the meeting with the Minister to which you've testified. The issue of Mr. Njenje's business interests, was that the only reason given for a discontinuation or suggested discontinuation of the investigation?
Yes, to the best of my recall, yes. And of course, it was, now that I look back on it, the minister was drawing extensions from an investigation into the Guptas that may extend to possibly investigation into the president. My recall, and I think the argument that we made is that that is not necessarily the case. We are investigating the Guptas, and whatever ramifications will come out of it will come out of it. And of course, it is then up to the president or the minister how to then deal with the recommendations that will be made. The fear that the investigation may extend to the president, again, was unwarranted. But the minister was not clear in the reason why he didn't want this investigation to stop. It seemed to me, at least, that he was of the view that he's going to come, provide a meal, have a discussion with us that this is going to end, and it was going to end like that. So I think he was also taken aback by the belief that we had that this is a national security issue.
Well, earlier on, I wondered whether there was something in the choice of the word fear. Why should it be a fear? But you are actually expressing
Yes.
what you understood to be his position,
Correct.
Minister.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just as a matter of principle, even if one of the three executives had a conflict of interest, would that have affected the in-principle decision to investigate where there was a need to investigate?
Absolutely not. And in fact, a proper investigation would allude to the conflict of interest to the extent that it needed to be placed on record. So even that was not a reason to stop the investigation.
Would there not have been a way, if there was any legitimate concern about a possible conflict of interest attaching to Mr. Njenje, would it not have been possible for the investigation to be continued without Mr. Njenje being involved himself in the investigation? Or was the problem that he was head of the very branch or unit that would do the investigation?
Yes. Now, Mr. Njenje would not be directly involved in the investigation. His personnel, his people, and the entire service in terms of the required components would. So there would have been a measure, as there should always be in every intelligence investigation, a measure of objectivity. So even to that extent, I felt the minister's concerns were somewhat irrational, to put it mildly. There was no case to stop it. Even if you looked at the methodology, nothing in the methodology would have led to the investigation being compromised or prejudiced or biased in any way.
Yes, thank you.
Did a meeting with the President follow?
It did indeed.
How long after the meeting with the Minister?
To the best of my understanding, again, memory is a faulty thing. I believe that meeting occurred the next day or the day after, but we didn't return to Pretoria. We stayed in Cape Town and then attended the meeting the next
Where did you meet with the President?
We met at the President's residence in Cape Town.
Who was present at the meeting?
At the meeting was, we waited first for the President. So at that meeting was Ambassador Matretuka, was Director Njenje and myself, and then we were joined by the President.
And what happened at the meeting? If you could just describe to the Chair, principally the exchange between yourselves on the one hand and the President on the other.
Yes. The President welcomed us. We were all seated. I did get a sense that he was briefed about why we were there, and obviously he knew that it was about the matter of the Gupta investigation. But the President started off with a discussion on essentially what is called the, I got to get this pronunciation right, the Richard Ndludli report. There was
Did you say Richard Ndluli report?
Yes,
Okay.
correct. That report, and I don't know whether evidence of that was led before the Commission yet.
Well, I don't think I've heard of a Richard Ndluli report.
Okay.
So, yes.
The report essentially was a report conducted by police crime intelligence when Mr. Ndludli was the head of crime intelligence, and it alluded to a possible gathering of ANC people who were planning in Newcastle to topple the President Zuma. And we...
Oh, I remember that part
Yes.
from the media, but not
Correct.
from the...
So
yes,
it is
yeah.
that report I'm referring to.
Yes.
The Director General, under the leadership of the Director General, an investigation into that report was conducted by
That is
the
now-
SSA.
Ambassador Mqetuka, when
Yes, by Ambassador
he
Matretuka.
initiated an
He
investigation.
initiated a report because, again, and I don't want to lead his evidence, but he was called by the judge in charge of interception, who raised a certain concern about the number of interceptions that are occurring in the police, and there seems to be something not right in the police service. Ambassador Matretuka, in his capacity as a DG of SSA, subjected the Ndluli report to a veracity test to see how truthful this report is. Is there anything in this report that is correct or etc.?
So,
And-
I'm sorry. So, there is what the public would have read in
Yes.
newspapers
Correct.
about a gathering of some ANC people in Newcastle.
In Newcastle,
or
that's
Escort, I can't
Yes, yeah.
remember.
Correct.
Plotting to unseat, I don't know whether the former president, but plotting some things.
Correct.
You say that those media articles were based on what you refer to as the Ndluli report.
No.
Oh,
The
oh.
Ndluli report is the report that spoke of that meeting in Newcastle Escort.
Oh, but where the newspapers got their stories,
Yes.
you don't know.
We don't know where the
Yeah,
newspaper
but there was a Ndluli report that talked about that meeting,
That's correct.
and that report was directed to whom?
To the President
To the
and
President.
to the Minister of Intelligence, the Minister of State Security, as I
Yes.
understand it, yes.
Okay, yeah, you may
So
continue.
Ambassador Matretuka subjected that report to a veracity test to see whether the elements of that report is truthful or not truthful. And the conclusion,
Sorry, just to make sure we are on the same page, what was the gist of that report as you
that a grouping of people came together, ministers and non-ministers came together in either Newcastle or Escort, and they had a meeting about how to topple President Zuma. Yes.
Okay, all right, continue.
So that report, our report, or the domestic branch's report on that report was submitted via the office of Ambassador Mark Katuka to the minister, and then from the minister to the president.
Okay, I know I was interrupting you. So Ambassador Makatuka initiated an investigation to establish the veracity of the Mdluli report.
Of the claims within the Mdluli
Their claims
report.
in the Mdluli
Yes.
report, and the result of that investigation was a report from the intelligence,
SSA, yes.
which was then submitted to the Minister of Intelligence and ultimately to the President.
That's correct.
Yes, okay, continue.
Right. So the president starts with our report on the Mdluli report in the meeting that we now have. And he says that he has read our report. Unfortunately, he believes the Mdluli report.
Yes,
And so too does the minister believe the Mdluli report.
yes.
And he finds that our report not to be standing the test of time. So in other words, he was rejecting our report
Yes.
and accepting the Mdluli report.
So from what you say, it appears that your report must have been critical of the claims made in the Mdluli report.
Indeed it was.
Yes. And the president was then saying he and the Minister of Intelligence were persuaded by the Mdluli report rather than by your report.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
Did the former president give any factual basis for rejecting what his security operatives had told him?
The best of my recall, he didn't. He pronounced that he believed the Mdluli report. And of course, that set the tone of our meeting, because essentially our report that rejected the Mdluli report has now been rejected by the president, who we are directly responsible to providing intelligence to.
And all three of you, and you must tell me if this is not something you can say, all three of you were agreed that your report was the correct report.
Correct.
Yes, okay.
And your report was the product, I take it, of your own investigations
And analysis.
and analysis.
So it must have been quite something, isn't it, to have a situation where the president rejects a report that three of the most senior people in the intelligence accept to be the correct report. Must have been quite something to the three of you, or not really?
Now, in the intelligence world, that is considered again, I'm trying to find the polite word. It's considered to be a lack of confidence.
Yes.
That when a president who is ultimately responsible, it's different. The president saying is, I don't accept your position, or don't accept your view about a particular matter. But when you have written a report and in which you say that the allegations contained by that element within government, and remember it's crime intelligence, and he says no, he agrees with the crime intelligence report, it's a vote of no confidence in your capacity. So we were all taken aback. I was taken aback because, as I've said, I have a long history with President Zuma, especially in matters of intelligence. And on matters of intelligence, he would know that all of us have a long history, all of us have a long working history with him, and that if our views are rejected, it's a tough one to deal with.
And I guess it's one thing if it's a report by one person,
Yes.
one of you. I think the one thing that makes it worse is that as far as you are concerned, all three of you say this is the right
Correct.
position. And for that to be rejected by the president would be quite something.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Did the matter then turn, did the discussion then turn to the issues of the Gupta investigation?
That's correct.
What transpired?
To my recall, Ambassador Maktatuka outlined our investigation, the reasons for our investigation. He had a document with him outlining the scan for the reasons of the investigation. He took the president through the discussion that we've had with the minister, the acrimonious discussion with the minister, and said to the president that we are here to say that we should conduct this investigation into the Gupta family. The president, and I must say, all due respect to the president, he didn't go off the handle, he didn't scream or shout, he said fine, he hears us, but he would like to explain the Gupta family to us. And the president went into a rather long explanation about the Gupta family, of how he first met them, of how they were of assistance to Duduzani Zuma when no one was going to employ Duduzani, how they've helped him in certain of his own trials and tribulations, and they are simply a business family, and that they were in fact introduced to the ANC and to people in government rather by people associated with President Mbeki, and it's, so they are not a creation of his own making, but this is a continuation of a relationship that existed through the passage of time, starting with the Mbeki administration. So he had he was very calm, he was very clear, very pointed in all of the issues, leaving and saying to us that he didn't think that there was an issue to be investigated, because he understands all the matters connected to the Gupta family. We listened very patiently. I can't recall whether we pushed back, but it was clear to me that, and later when I checked with the others, that President Zuma, in no uncertain terms, expressed his preference for no investigation to continue.
Did he say anything about foreign capital and the purchase of the uranium mine?
No, that matter was discussed previously with him and I. He may have alluded to it in this meeting, but that was a previous, he may have alluded to it. There's a lot of speculation and rumors about the Guptas, but this is not the case. They're very good business people, etc. And that there are a lot of rumors around them. And of course it was associated to a part of a victimization narrative, and meaning that, and this is what hurt me more, that investigation into the Guptas is because people wanting to get to him as the president. So he saw it as a part of a victimization narrative. And of course, what was surprising, and I say hurtful to me, because I've had a long personal history with President Zuma, and so did Maktatuka, and so did Gibson. And we were speaking to him in his capacity as president, but not unmindful of his own long history in intelligence. And as an intelligence officer, he should have understood what we were saying, that, this is a matter of national security, and if you could simply put your own feelings aside for the moment and see it as national security, we would then be able, after the investigation, to deal with the issues insofar as it pertains to him. But I got a sense by that time President Zuma was very much wedded to the narrative that there are people trying to topple him. There are, spies around every corner who's trying to set him up, and it's not really about the Guptas at the end of the day, it is about him. So it was, as he continued to speak, it became a very uncomfortable discussion for us, because I couldn't categorically say in my own mind that he was actually saying that we are part of those who want to topple him. But I was left with that feeling, and it did make me, for the first time, uncomfortable. And this is a relationship of many decades with President Zuma and myself, and I never imagined that I would ever be in that position where I would have to doubt whether he actually trusts me or not. So it felt odd and awkward for me personally, and I'm sure it must have felt like that for others as well.
Did he specify how the Gupta family had helped him with his son Dudazani?
Yes, if I recall, he mentioned that Dudazani at some point went to India for studies and then stayed with the Gupta family, or got to know the Gupta family there, and then when he came back they continued that relationship, and he elaborated that this was a relationship that did not begin today, did not begin when he was a president, and began a long time ago, and perhaps it even reached its height at the time where he was most in despair, and it is not related to him being president. So I got firmly and of course I've heard this before, and he repeated it. But this time he repeated in the narrative of people wanting to topple him and etc.
Assume for a moment that the narrative about the Guptas and their relationship with the president was being used as part of a conspiracy to harm or dethrone President Zuma. Would that have been any reason to stop the investigation?
No. The basis for the investigation was simple. It was, in our opinion, a breach at the highest level of the land. And the breach, again, is either it was information peddling on their part, a leak from the president's office, or a suggestion by them for the appointment of a minister. And in our understanding of intelligence, it was clear, in at least my mind, that they were attempting to engage in creating dependency. And often you create dependency to extract value.
And was this, perhaps not in the exact terms you've expressed now, but were these sentiments conveyed to the former president?
Yes, they were conveyed to the former president.
You say in your statement, in relation to what you recall and don't recall about a specific instruction from the president, well, what do you say now about whether he instructed you or not expressly to stop the investigation?
The president, in no uncertain terms, expressed his positive sentiment towards the Guptas. And in the context of the narrative that he outlined, that there were attempts to topple him, that I can only but read into the matter that it was the non-verbal way of instructing us not to continue with the investigation. And I left the meeting with no uncertain terms that this investigation should not continue, not because it was necessitated, but because this is the wish of the President, that it should not happen.
So do I understand from that answer that there was no express instruction in as
Correct.
many words, stop the investigation?
Yes, he didn't say stop this investigation.
You were left with a certain impression at the conclusion of the meeting, which you've now expressed to the Chair.
Correct.
Did you act on your conclusion?
Shamefully, I would have to say something rather shameful here, that I think we left the meeting with the view that the investigation should not continue. And if it does continue, it's going to continue at the cost of our jobs. But of course, we also left the meeting with the view that our relationship with the Minister has broken down. And now our relationship with the President has broken down. And in not so polite language, stuff was going to hit the fan rather soon. So I don't know whether the domestic branch is going to continue the investigation or not, but I think we were of the view that we will not continue the investigation.
On reflection, how did you regard the attitude of the President in relation to security matters in general and this matter in particular?
I think the President he disregarded his own experience in this matter. He disregarded the collective professional advice of three of the top senior directors and director generals of the intelligence community that was advising that there is a legitimate and warranted basis for investigation. And I think in that regard, he didn't properly apply his mind to his obligation to provide effective and efficient direction of the intelligence services. And I think the country has paid the price as a result thereof.
How did you feel as a senior security official after the meeting had concluded?
Well, I think to have the President reject your advice is when you are in the top echelons of the intelligence services, a very difficult thing to deal with, because, like I've said, you are appointed as a head of an intelligence services because you believe that you have certain qualities, and one of the important qualities of an intelligence head is the ability not only to lead a service, but to able to manage information discreetly, with discretion, with analysis. And when a head of an intelligence service, and when three of them say to you that, sir, we think this investigation is warranted, and for the President to say, in not so many words, no, it's not. It's a big thing in the intelligence world. It's a put down that you would spend lots of hours reflecting on, because it's a fundamental breach of the trust relationship between you and the President.
Well, I don't know how crime intelligence ranks when compared to the intelligence branches that the three of you were dealing with? Or is it two and then the head?
The crime intelligence?
Two units. You, Mr. Maqetuga, and Mr. Njenje.
Yes.
I'm just trying to remember whether there were 3 units. No, I think there were 2 units, the internal and the external.
Correct.
And then Mr. Maqetuga was the head of a combination of the 2.
That's correct.
Yeah. I take it that crime intelligence, while quite important, maybe might not have been at the same level as the intelligence or state security department that Mr. Maqetuga was heading.
That's correct.
Those were 2
Yes.
different.
And what was unique in our situation, that Mr. Maqetuga or Ambassador Maqetuga had the full authority of a Director General, the SSA.
Yes, yes.
He is the accounting officer.
Yes.
Director Njenje at the time was appointed at the level of a Director General,
Yes.
an accounting officer,
Yes.
and so too was
Yeah.
I, the accounting officer.
Yes. Yes.
Whereas the Crime Intelligence Division is a division of a larger organization in which there are many, SAPS, in which there are many divisions. So again, it is the level of the Director Generals is much higher than the level of a divisional head.
And of course, this not just one
Yes.
person at the level of Director General. It's 3 senior officials
Yes.
who are at that level.
Correct.
As well. And the department that Ambassador Maqetuga was heading, and the department from which all 3 of you came, or the department you were serving different units, 2 different units, was the one that effectively specializes on intelligence.
Correct.
Crime intelligence is just part of intelligence generally. So this was not just a case of the president not agreeing with your report, but also it was a question of him not agreeing with your report in preference to what other report.
Correct.
So if it was your report was standing alone, maybe it might have been one thing, but it was a comparison. So I can imagine that you must have felt, all 3 of you must have felt quite bad.
We did, sir.
Yes.
And of course, the added to the matter is the long histories that we have with President Zuma. We have advised him through many parts of his life when he was the head of intelligence.
In the ANC.
Yes, and when in ANC, and when he had certain difficulties, and now that he was the president. So you may not be happy on the way I presented my advice, but what you would have to accept is that the sincerity of my advice cannot be questioned. And I think we felt that he questioned the sincerity of our advice, and that made us feel uncomfortable. And in the world of new age, in the world of which we should live in the world of empathy, it was difficult to deal with.
Just going back to the meeting with him, am I right to understand that there was a big difference between the atmosphere under which your meeting with the president was conducted compared to the atmosphere which prevailed at the meeting you had with the minister? The one with the minister having been very confrontational, and the one with the president, seemingly from what you say, having been very civil and polite. Am I right?
That is correct. It was very civil, very polite.
Yes.
And I would add, one more, it was prescriptive.
Yes.
Yes, in the sense that the president was speaking,
Yes.
giving his views, we were listening.
Yes.
Where we could push back, we pushed
Yes.
back, but
Yes.
the more he
Yes.
spoke, the more we retreated
Yes.
into the position of,
So, so would it be correct to say it was a meeting where both sides were listening to each other? They might not have agreed, but they were listening to each other's points of view. Or is that not a proper description?
it would be a proper description to the
Yes.
extent that we were listening more
Yeah,
as the President Zuma spoke more.
yes, yes.
But I think he understood the reason why we were arguing that there should be an investigation. That I was left with no uncertain, at least in my mind, and for a couple of reasons. One is that we were articulate. The second, the reasons we gave were compelling. And thirdly, that given his own experience to intelligence, that he knew what we were talking about.
Did he raise this issue of Mr. Njenja's conflict of interest, of business interest that
No, he did
the
not.
minister had raised? He
No,
didn't raise that
did
issue?
not. Did not.
So, was the position that, as far as you could see, he gave you this long explanation that he gave you because he wanted you to be persuaded that there was no need for the investigation? Is that how you would see it?
That's the way I
How
saw
you
it.
saw- you saw it.
That he was giving this long explanation so that we could be persuaded to the belief that no investigation
Yes.
was necessary.
Yes, yes.
Of course, he added it in the context of the narratives to dispose him and the victimization narrative, which made it difficult for us to push back on. Because here's the president telling you that people are trying to topple me. I'm giving you an explanation that my relationship with this family is untoward. And if you are pushing back on the reason why we need to investigate the family, it's as if he's saying that, but you are the guys who want to topple me.
So the one thing you are clear about, he didn't say stop the
He
investigation.
didn't say stop.
Yeah. The second thing you are clear about, he took time to explain his relationship with the Guptas and so on and so on. And three, it was quite clear that he was against the continuation of the investigation.
That's the correct.
His view was against it.
His view was against
He
that.
was against it, yeah.
Or put better, he didn't think it necessary.
Yeah, didn't think it was necessary.
Given the fact that he was providing the
Yes.
background
And
to
what he
all of
knew.
this. Yes.
Yes. And then you say he then put in this bit that, as I understand it, and you must tell me if I'm not understanding your evidence correctly, he then put in this little bit that was to the effect that there were people who wanted to topple him. What was your impression from the discussion and from what you were saying, that if the three of you were to push and say, assuming you could, were to push and say, we want to continue, he might see you as part of people who wanted to topple him or what?
Yes, that did occur to me, in all
Yes.
honesty.
Yes, but you also said the discussion was such that although he didn't say you three were part of that, but
No,
you
he
felt
didn't say
some
that. Yeah,
impression. You felt some impression that he might not have been sure that you are not part of it or something like that.
Yes, and don't forget, sir, that we are we are intelligence officers in our own rights.
Yes.
And joining the dots is not a difficult exercise
Yes,
at that
yes.
level.
Yes, yes.
So one of the dots that was joined in my mind, and
Yeah.
I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone
Yes.
else, in my mind that pushing this investigation further
Yeah,
was going to lead, in my view,
yeah.
to the president concluding that
Yeah.
we are part of those now.
Of whatever agenda.
Yeah, the fictional or non-fictional, and I must say
Yes.
that it is fictional.
Yeah.
But it was going to lead to
Yes.
that, yes.
Okay. Going back to the issue of who directs the operations of
Yes.
intelligence, you said that the minister should not be
Yes.
doing that. At some stage, we talked about the head of the intelligence being the one doing that, but at some stage, maybe 2 times or so, you talked in a manner that made me believe that it would be within the prerogative of the president to direct operations
Correct.
of intelligence. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, the constitutional states it quite categorically under section 209(2).
Yes.
The president, as the head of the national executive, must appoint a woman or a man as the head of each intelligence service established in terms of subsection 1, and must either assume political responsibility for the control and direction of any of these services, or designate a member of cabinet to do so. So the president does have the power to direct, and of course, and this is perhaps something that arising out of your own report, sir, would be to tease out this definition of political responsibility. What does political responsibility mean? But that is an issue that we should park for your report. But in my view, the president has the power to direct the intelligence services.
So no, that's fine. I think that people like you who have experience and knowledge of the intelligence need to show sufficient interest in the work of the Commission and the recommendations that the Commission could make, because you being the experts in the area, it would be important that when the Commission looks at a recommendation or invites submissions, that some of the people who have expertise and experience could make some submissions to say the Commission should consider the following possible recommendations that could assist in the future with regard to intelligence. So, but going back to your meeting with the President, so your understanding would therefore be that once the President, once it's clear from what the President says that he's not approving the pursuit of a certain investigation, since ultimately the power to direct the operations of intelligence vests in him, you would have no choice but to accept that situation.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And ultimately, I understand you did accept that situation.
Correct.
So to summarize, at the point that you departed from the minister and the meeting with the minister, I understand your evidence, and correct me if I'm wrong, to be that the 3 senior executives were determined to continue with this investigation subject to a discussion with the President.
Correct.
You went to a meeting with the President where, to your knowledge, he exercised his constitutional powers and influence.
Correct.
The result of that intervention was that the investigation was terminated.
Correct.
Chair, it's past 5 o'clock. We have a way to go,
Yes.
and
No,
there's much to be done before
Yes.
tomorrow.
Should we start a little earlier tomorrow, maybe?
Because we have to consult,
Because Wednesday is another witness.
I would prefer if we started at the normal
10.
time and attempt to
Yeah.
finish tomorrow.
Yeah, and you think you will manage the, or
Chair,
you say
one is
we'll cross the
reluctant
bridge when we come to it?
Because much of this evidence forms the background to evidence that will come later. One is reluctant to
Not to do
divest
justice.
oneself of the advantage of hearing
Yeah.
senior officials in the investigations, because the question of accountability, the question of controls, the question of financial accountability and supervision, all are central to evidence that is to come. In other words, to answer the question that you pose, how did it happen?
Yes, yes. So, okay, we'll start at 10 tomorrow and then see how it goes. But before we adjourn, I just want to put this question, and maybe you don't have an answer to it. Do you know, from the point of view of intelligence, what should happen when the intelligence branch has got information that needs to be, has got an issue that needs to be investigated, or people that need to be investigated, but the head of the intelligence or the minister of intelligence or the president is conflicted. Well, I'm asking all three because it could be different. Do you know what the position would be with the, at that time, Ambassador Mqetuga, if there was something and maybe a friend of his seemed to be investigated, what would he, how would he deal with that situation? Would he take part in making any decisions, or would he disclose, or would he not be part of it? And
So,
then you can deal with the minister as well, although you might have dealt with, and then I come to the president.
in the matter of governance in relation to all of this, with Ambassador Mqetuga, it's easy. You can go above to the minister
Yes.
and then convince the minister that that investigation needs to happen, etc., etc. If there was no minister, you can go to the president and justify an investigation for an official or another minister, because in effect that is what happens on counterintelligence investigations. But when it comes to a matter pertaining to the president himself, where that is where the constitution, the law, is all silent, because it was never a situation envisaged. And even if it was envisaged, the way to deal with the matter, I cannot think of any other way. I can think about whistleblowing. I can think about providing this kind of information to the Joint Standing Committee of Intelligence, but all of them would come up with the same problem. And this beggars the question that has always been the case: who guards the guardians? And that's the essence you're dealing with here.
Well, there is enough time for us to ponder over the issue to the extent that it's relevant. But I think there is a provision in the Constitution which, if I recall correctly, is along the lines that when the president is conflicted, I don't know whether it simply says is not available to perform a certain duty, the deputy president should perform that duty. Now, it may be that, I don't know if it's around 209 or 190. It may be that there might be debates. If it says not available, there might be debates about whether or not that would encompass a situation. No, it's not 209, maybe 190. Whether it would encompass a situation where physically the president is available, but maybe legally is not available to perform that duty because he should not do so because he's conflicted.
Section 90.
Is it section 90?
91.
90, brackets 1, close brackets.
Yes, do you want to read it, Mr.
It
Pretorius?
reads, under the head acting president,
Yes.
when the president is absent from the republic or otherwise unable to fulfill the duties of president, or during a vacancy in the office of the president, an office bearer in the order below acts as president. And then it lists A, the deputy
Yes.
president, B, a minister designated by the president, C, a minister designated by the other members of the cabinet, D, the speaker until the National Assembly designates one of its other members. And then 2, an acting president has the responsibilities, powers and functions of the president.
Yes, so I think that's the one I had in mind. So one of the scenarios is where it says where the president is otherwise unable to fulfill the duties. There may be an argument that it caters for a situation where he is physically available,
Yes.
but
Conflicted.
for some reason
Yeah.
unavailable.
Yes.
Maybe because he's conflicted, maybe because of some other reason. There may be, but also I think the Executive Ethics Act, if I'm not mistaken, may be having something about,
Yes.
or maybe even the Constitution may be having something to say members of the executive should not act in circumstances where they are conflicted. But we don't need to look at it now. So I was just thinking whether in that kind of situation, whether he should have dealt with the matter himself or whether he should have let somebody else deal with it. But we might look at it more closer to the time of the recommendations and the debates and submissions.
Section 96.2 and 96.1 also refer to the Code of Ethics to which you referred.
Yes.
Members of the Cabinet and Deputy Ministers must act in accordance with the Code of Ethics prescribed by national legislation. Members of the Cabinet and Deputy Ministers may not undertake any other paid work, act in a way that is inconsistent with their office, or expose themselves to any situation involving the risk of a conflict between their official responsibilities and private interests, or use their position or any information entrusted to them to enrich themselves or improperly benefit any other person.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll adjourn for today, and we will start at normal time tomorrow, 10 a.m. So we'll leave it at that. We adjourn.
All rise.